Welcome to It's Settled, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of what happens after a serious injury.
Hear authentic, inspiring stories from those who face life-challenging injuries, their loved ones, and industry professionals working to make a difference.
I'm Andrea Mills, Chief Client Officer at Ametros.
And I'm Melissa Coleman, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Ametros.
Now, it's settled. Let's dive into the episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode of It's Settled, the Ametros podcast. Today, I'm joined with my co-hosts, Melissa Coleman, and some awesome industry guests, Erin and Stephanie. Erin, would you mind taking a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Erin Bishop, and I am the ADR Supervisor at the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission in Richmond, Virginia.
Awesome. And Stephanie?
Hi there. I'm a claimant's attorney practicing in Denver, Colorado.
Awesome. And for those of you who need a refresher, Melissa Coleman is our SVP of Marketing at Ametros, and your other co-host, me, Andrea Mills, is our Chief Client Officer at Ametros. And in honor of Women's History Month, as we did last year, we wanted to dedicate a podcast episode to women in the industry, hear insights from them, knowledge, background, where they've come to be in the industry and found themselves in workers' comp. So we'll probably start there and then weave in a bunch of other topics, but really love that we have 4 female leaders in our industry on the podcast today and really looking forward to it. All right, Erin, wanted to start with you because I think you have a really interesting background when you were sharing with us before about how you've kind of always known what you wanted to do. So tell us.
That's right. I think I'm a rare kind of person nowadays that knew what they wanted to do at the age of 11. When I was in 6th grade, I joined the conflict assistance team in middle school. And it was a group of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who were tasked with helping their peers try to resolve their issues. So I was a peer mediator, and the best part was getting out of class, I'll say, at that time. But the next best thing was being able to see my friends go from a point of contention to, being able to get along again, sharing lockers. That was always the biggest issue. Or liking the same boy, or, just getting in trouble and ratting, the next person out. Snitches get stitches. But it was so gratifying to see people come out on the other side with the assistance of me. Like, I helped them reach a resolution, resolve their issues, and kind of come out on the other side of it. And to me, that instant gratification of seeing my hard work kind of, reach a successful point was something that I was hooked on from that point on. I was like, I know that this is what I want to do. So I went to a college that offered conflict analysis and resolution, George Mason University, shout out Patriots. And from then went to get my master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution. And I've been mediating ever since for the state of Virginia in state government. So that's what brought me to kind of the workers' comp field, because in Virginia, workers' compensation is a state agency. So my field of mediation was very specific all along, which led me to workers' comp. I know a lot of people say they stumbled upon workers' comp or found themselves in the field. I kind of found myself in the field by way of intention. So that's how I'm here, and I love it.
That's awesome. And I don't know if many of us share the same story or passion to know what we wanted to do when we were younger and then turn that into a lifelong career. So that's awesome. Very rewarding. Stephanie, will you please share with us a little bit how you came to be an attorney in Denver and how you kind of thought through law school and then what you wanted to do next?
Of course. And I would say that my story couldn't be much more opposite of Erin's. I joke sometimes, actually, when people ask me why, when I decided to be a work comp attorney, I joke that this is what I wanted to do since I was in kindergarten, but that's obviously not true. In fact, when I was in kindergarten, I wanted to be a brain surgeon, is what I would always say. Unfortunately, I get very nauseous at the sight of blood, so that didn't work out. But in reality, I have very supportive parents who all throughout my life and childhood encouraged me to keep options open to take opportunities as they come. So I went into undergrad not knowing what I was going to major in. I left undergrad knowing I wanted to go to grad school, but not being sure what type of grad school. I had worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office, so I had a little bit of interest in the law. I also found out that you could just go take the LSAT without really studying and see what happens. And so that's what I did. And I got into a couple of local law schools, went and have loved it. And even getting into the workers' compensation industry, the same thing. It's just an opportunity that arose. When I graduated law school in 2012, there wasn't a lot of legal opportunities available. And I knew I wanted to be in Colorado. And the opportunity that arose was one within the workers' compensation field. So I've gotten here by happenstance, I would say, but I also know that this is where I belong. I love what I do. I grew up in a small town, very blue collar community. Most of my family are farmers and factory workers and that sort of thing. And working, and helping the people who are injured on the job and are really good folks and people who need my assistance really provides a lot of gratification. So I'm happy I ended up where I did.
That's awesome. And it's great to hear that both of you do really want to help other people. And I think that really keeps me in the space as well. And just working at Amitros and the fact that we're able to help the injured worker after their settlement and just the stories and lives that we're able to impact is really meaningful. So I think it speaks to all of our core intentions. So I love that.
And can we just take a moment to Stephanie, you said that you just took the LSATs and passed and got in. How impressive is that?
I was having a good day. Trust me, there are lots of not impressive days in my career. I don't know. And I found out after the fact that everybody else studied for it. I was like, ooh, oopsies. But as I said, I think it was just meant to be. So
impressive.
It is. Because I also didn't study and went and took it and didn't mind. I did not have the same outcome.
You took the LSATs too?
I took the LSAT twice.
Oh my gosh.
I don't test well.
I just know it from Legally Blonde.
But it's hard. Yeah. Isn't that what she says?
That's Harvard.
My mother is a mathematician in computer science. She was a professor growing up, and she loved logic games. And so I grew up doing the exact type of logic games that are or at least at that time were on the LSAT. I think as I understand it, it's changed a bit since then. But I literally think that's what it was. I did really, really well in the logic game portion of it, thanks to my mathematical mother. So there
is a ton when I took it. Probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There was a lot of logic games on there. So that is still a thing. Well, 20 years ago is a thing. I don't know when you took it, but maybe less than 20 years ago.
Well, about that. That sounds like a lot of years, but I think that's about right.
Yeah. But whenever you have to write your bio or something and you're like, oh, how many years have I been in the industry? And then you're like, oh.
Yeah, that number keeps getting larger, and I'm like, that can't be right. Yeah. That cannot be right.
Yeah. What do you? I'm a grad student. What do you mean? And Melissa, I do want to take the opportunity to kind of ask you to, how you found yourself in the industry as well.
Yeah. So unlike Erin, when I was 5, I wanted to be a Barbie when I grew up. So obviously didn't do that, but really had no expectation for what I wanted to do in the future when I was younger. I really enjoyed creative things, creative writing, was always very into that. I was part of my high school's group DECA, which was business competitions and things like that. And then I decided I just randomly wanted to be pre-med in college. So I did my first semester pre-med. Similar to Stephanie, blood and I do not mix very well. When we had to dissect a sheep brain, I was like, I think this is not for me. And that's when I really decided, from the beginning, a creative pursuit and combining it with business was more my speed. And that's when I joined our marketing program. I went to Simmons. I think now it's university, but back then it was college. So a small women's college in Boston. And I very much enjoyed my experience there and really learned a lot of, about different aspects of business from my professors and really enjoyed all of the aspects of marketing that I did. I was lucky enough being in the city that I was able to do 3 or 4 internships as part of my, school. And I think that was really the most helpful in terms of exposure of what does a real job in marketing look like? What do I like about this? What do I not like about this? I was able to do some in-house work and some agency work, which I did not like at all. So I think it was really formative for me. I was able to intern with the Boston Bruins, which was such a fun experience as a community relations and youth hockey intern. And I think that really connected me to this idea of like giving back and like helping people. And that was a lot of work with like children or like hospital visits and stuff like that, and supporting community relations. And I really think that like kind of giving back has stuck with me. And I feel like when this role opened up at Ametros, I had no idea what workers' compensation was, had no experience in insurance. I randomly applied to it and was like, I didn't think I was going to accept it because my mom actually worked across the street. And I was like, I don't want to be that close to my mother. But I have been here it'll be 9 years this year. And I love the work that we do. And I love this industry and our ability to help people and help injured workers.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I know that you and Erin met recently at a conference, well, recently as of last year. Can you speak, Erin, a little bit about that organization that you belong to, in which you and Melissa were both recipients of an award?
Sure. It's the IAIABC.
Held it.
Or alphabet soup, as a lot of people call it. Melissa and I met at a conference in Toronto, and at the time she was being recognized as a Next Gen Award winner. The organization recognizes people in the field under the age of 40 who are doing amazing things for the workers' compensation industry. And, it runs the gamut from people like Melissa who are doing PR, to myself mediating, others who are data analytics, claims specialists, the insurance agents, and claims reps. The list goes on and on. It's a mix of government organizations as well as private industry. So it's an honor to be a part of such a wonderful group of people. Every year we get together at least twice a year, and that's just in person. We also get together by phone or virtual meetings, and getting to learn from all these wonderful people has really opened my eyes and gives me hope for the future of the industry, because as everybody knows, the boomers are on their way out. I'm sorry if that was harsh to say it that way, but a lot of our workforce is nearing retirement age, and now the torch is being passed to the younger generation. And we're capable, we're competent, and I can't wait to see where we take the field.
Well, if you ask my 11-year-old, I am a boomer too, so that's about me. But I got a lot of life left in me, and a lot of years left in me to work. But Stephanie, I think you have a really interesting volunteer program that you're part of as well in Colorado. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
I think you're referencing. So I currently am the president of the Workers' Compensation Education Association in Colorado. And I think, Erin, you just said Alphabet Soup. I guess that's our own Alphabet Soup organization. We are the claimants bar of workers' compensation attorneys in the state. And so we're not for profit. We do things like putting on educational conferences for our members, but actually the most significant work that we do every year is legislative work. We lobby at the Capitol to try and make positive changes to the Colorado workers' compensation system and further positively impact injured workers. And so I just took over as the president of that organization in November, I believe it is. And it has been a whirlwind since then. Lots of big things happening legislatively in Colorado this year. But it's really a great opportunity to give back. I really enjoy doing it. And it's very different than my legal work, right? It's helping many, many people in a broad stroke rather than one individual after they're injured, but all goes to that same mission.
That's awesome. How do you balance kind of doing the bar work, your day job, being a mom? How does that work?
Well, some days, how it feels is that I'm doing poorly at all of it. But the good people in my life assure me that that's not the case. It's not easy, and I'm sure that all of you absolutely understand that it's. I think the older I get, the more there is to balance, and there's a learning curve, but I'm getting there. I'm a big fan of time blocking. So I'll block a certain amount of the day and say, this is time. We call our organization the WCEA. And so I say, this is WCEA time. And then when it's time to put that away, I put it away, and it's time to answer client emails and that kind of thing. Honestly, and again, I'm guessing most of you can relate to this. Probably the hardest part to balance is when the family comes in, especially I have a 6-year-old at home, and he just doesn't really care if mommy is on the phone with the judge or care if I'm talking to a client or legislators or that kind of thing. And in this day and age, with everything done on Zoom, it is so normal for me to have, a 6-year-old running behind me, a dog barking in the distance, all that kind of thing. But, it's interesting. I actually think that, especially when I'm doing something that is adversarial in nature, talking to attorneys on the other side, sometimes talking with legislators, it's a way of humanizing yourself to them. And actually, in the long run, I think since COVID, it's kind of been a good thing that we can all get to know each other a little bit more personally.
Stephanie, how long is your term as president?
My term is for 2 years, which sounds like a long time, especially right now at the beginning of it. But I've got a really great support system and team that helps me with it all. So I think it'll go by fast and be lots of fun.
That's really cool. Out of curiosity, have there been a lot of women presidents of that organization in the past?
Let me think. Yeah, actually, that organization has been fairly diverse. There have been several women who came before me and kind of paved that road, which is fantastic. But, I think that gender issues and that kind of thing are always present too. I feel them sometimes. But it's all in all a very, very welcoming community here. That's
awesome. Well, thinking about the women who've paved the way before you, Erin, has there ever been, a mentor or advice you've gotten in the past that was really impactful to you?
I have had 2 really great mentors over the course of my career. The first was fresh out of college, and I was working for the first state agency as a mediator, and we did fair housing mediation. So any complaints of discrimination from anyone looking to obtain housing or after they were already housed, whether it was in a renting situation or sublease situation, we handled those complaints of discrimination and tried to help people reach a resolution. And also educate people about the fair housing laws. Many of those fair housing laws mirror EEOC laws and equal employment opportunity. So civil rights was largely at play. And that mentor, she was African American and had been a mediator for over 20 years at that point. And in the state of Virginia, where mediation kind of got its start, was in more of the grassroots realm. In social work, a lot of indoctrinated social work employees. And so to see someone look like me who was also a mediator in a state agency was eye-opening for me. The old saying, you want to be able to see what you can be. Mm-hmm. So having, that in my very first job out of college was enlightening. Like I could do this. I could make this a career, and it could be a long-lasting career. So she really helped shape me in coming to my own into the mediator world and into kind of just state government. And my other mediator, mentor mediator, Debbie Blevins, she is amazing. She just retired after 21 years for the state of Virginia. She kind of took me under her wing and taught me everything she knows about the workers' comp industry, which is very different to most of kind of how I learned and what I learned. I felt like, workers' comp is so different. And she, kept saying, it is very different, but you're going to learn it one day. And she taught me, I guess the biggest thing that she taught me is the art of making people believe that what you help them come to is their own kind of by design on their own. So you can turn the course of any conversation. You can persuade anyone to do anything. But if you make them believe that they came to it on their own, then that's the huge success in it. So I've watched her do that several times, and there's an art to it, and I'm learning, and it can go a long way in helping people get where they want to go and how to get there the most efficient way. So it's been great.
That's very cool. Would you say within the other mediators that you work with or that you've met along the way, is it very diverse or?
It is not that diverse, I'll be honest. In Virginia, for the Workers' Compensation Commission, we only have one other mediator of color. I would say our mediators, it might be split between men and women, but in terms of ethnicity and race, it's not diverse.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back, of any mediation that I've ever been to, and I've not seen a lot of diverse candidates, but I do think the injured worker population is wildly diverse. And I like what you said about, see what you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And also I think it comes to when you're in a situation where you are making big life decisions or you're negotiating things, it is nice to have someone maybe that looks like you or has similar background or can relate to you or you feel very comfortable with. So I'm sure some more diverse representation would be helpful to mediation or attorneys or any situation.
Yes, very. And we're trying. We started a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative in 2020, shortly after George Floyd died. And one of the big initiatives to come out of it was outreach and education, but specifically to get the diverse population to the field of workers' compensation. So that meant going to law schools, going to colleges, and really trying to put the focus on those who obviously would not come to this field on their own, kind of pulling them in and enticing them and educating them about all the great things that workers' comp does, all the benefits, and the reason why it's important to everybody, or could be at some point in their life if they ever got injured on the job.
I think that's such a great takeaway for excuse me, any company or, institution within our industry too. Like you talked about, there is a large population that is leaving this industry and there is so much opportunity here for everybody. And I think it's really important to consider diversity efforts in that. Like there's so many folks out there who want jobs and fulfilling careers too. Like that is possible here. And I think that's a strategy that people should be including is like you said, those types of outreach and intentional efforts. I guess, Stephanie, like a question that I have for you, you kind of spoke a little bit to the group that you're a part of and how there has been strong, female leadership in the past. I'm curious, how that has maybe empowered you in your career and any challenges that you face, because I think as women, we can all agree that there is still, a long way to go in terms of challenges that we have to face as women every day. And so curious if having strong female leaders before you has really impacted you in like a mentorship perspective.
Yeah, I absolutely think it has. I guess what I'd say is when I think back on my mentors, they're all men. But one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I first started practicing law from my male partner was go find other good female attorneys and watch them and study them and see what you can learn from them. Because he said, I can teach you the law. I can teach you how to file paperwork, right? I can teach you how to hone your arguments for hearing or trial. But there are stylistic things that really he couldn't teach me and he couldn't help me with. And so that was really great advice. And I think that's absolutely something I've done. And it's been kind of fun as I've aged in my legal career. I've little by little told some of those folks, gone up to them. Some of them are on the other side of the bar, but gone up to them and said, I just want you to know that you were one of the people I identified very early on as a role model. And I wanted to model myself after you because the way that women argue is often different inherently than the way men argue. The way our arguments and aggression is perceived is also very different. And so there are just some stylistic things that you have to figure out for yourself. And so that was really, really good advice that I got very early on.
I guess I've never really thought about that the way that you would be perceived in an argument as a woman is very different than how you would be perceived in an argument as a man.
Absolutely. And right, the legal system is adversarial. And I know for a fact that, especially communications via email, things can be lost when you're not talking face to face or even on the phone. and messages that I send when I am simply advocating on behalf of my client. I have heard direct responses sometimes that I am being, inappropriate or too aggressive or that kind of thing, where I am absolutely confident that if a male counterpart had sent the same message, it would have been accepted without any second thought. And so, I think there's a fine line there. Sometimes I'm in the mood to fight back against that and say, you know what, I'm going to phrase this in any which way I want to. And I am aggressive today. I'm mad. You treated my client badly, right? There are other days, though, where a softer, gentler approach, goes a lot farther. So, I oftentimes think about the carrot versus the stick, and there's the time for using each.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I guess in terms of, we've talked about mentorship. Have you guys kind of closely related to that in terms of networking, like your perspectives on forming a strong network for yourself? Like I've heard your personal and professional board of directors, right? Like you have a strong network of people that you turn to. Have you guys developed that throughout your careers? Are you currently developing that? And have you found that helpful?
I think for me, I haven't quite developed it as thoroughly as I would like to. I'll be quite honest about that. I still feel young in my career. I still feel like I just started working last year. So that may be part of it, is that I haven't admitted how long I've been in the field and how far I've come. But moments like these and taking the time to reflect on that, that is an area that I probably should start to pursue. I know that being a part of organizations and being members of some of the ancillary organizations make it easier to do. For instance, Melissa, since meeting you, we've been in touch a couple of times, and now we're on a few other different committees for the same organization. So I think just being open, Stephanie, like you mentioned earlier, being open to opportunities and being willing to jump in and kind of seeing what things are all about, taking the leap to become a member of a board of directors or president of an organization. Those are opportunities that I will be seeking out and will be willing to join. So I'm excited for that on the horizon. And I have a lot of work to do, but I'm ready to do it.
I asked that question knowing that I also have not fully developed any sort of professional or personal board of directors.
I'm glad it's not just me. And when you're raising a family, you don't have all the time in the world to do your work and raise your family and do all of the other things and join all of the other organizations and network and go to happy hours and go to meetings that happen in the evening or after sign-off time. So, there's a point in time in everyone's career that it may be easier to do. I think for me, that's coming up now as my children are older and more self-sufficient.
I love that. Stephanie, what about you?
Yeah, interestingly, Erin, again, a really good piece of early advice that I got when I first started practicing was to go try and build a community, go try and build, a network of folks that I could rely on. And I guess I would say that initially my efforts in doing that were probably fairly awkward. But back then in my career, I had the time. As you're saying, now I really don't. But back then I did. And so, there are times I was cold calling people. I would call up people that I knew were leaders in our community here, or sometimes folks I knew that were my age that I thought I should get to know. And I would call them and say, I think we should know each other. I know you belong to this other organization. Can you take me along to an event? That kind of thing. Sometimes that went really well. Honestly, other times it was really awkward. There are specific moments I still look back on now and kind of cringe over. I would say, though, that because I got started early at this point, I actually do feel like I'm kind of settling into a really comfortable point where I have a really great group of people around me and folks that I can trust to call on all kinds of different issues. And actually taking this leadership position within our state organization has really kind of solidified that for me. I had to work really hard to get the position that I did. In fact, the first time I applied to be in leadership, I got passed over for somebody who was a male who had much less experience than me, and it hurt. It hurt a lot. But getting into the position and proving myself, I have found that I've gotten to know lots more people, folks that otherwise I wasn't real close to, and who've come and said, "You're doing a great job. I want to be a part of it. Let's work on these projects together." And so I really do feel like just even in these last few months, I've kind of settled into a pretty comfortable place networking wise.
That's awesome to hear. I was reflecting upon just, I don't know, sometimes I catch myself thinking back about where my career has gone and how I've gotten here. And I'm so glad you mentioned that it was awkward, because I do think cold calling may be a younger person's game, because you kind of have nothing to lose, right? Like, you can call that person, you can knock down doors, you can go awkwardly to a happy hour and introduce yourself. It is awkward, but when you're younger, you really have nothing else to lose. Like, you don't have a family yet, you don't have responsibilities, you don't have adult bills. You can, help to put yourself out there in that way. But then it does pay off in the end, right? Like, there's so many benefits from it. But cold calling is a rough spot there, but it's certainly a younger person's thing. I don't know how much I'd do that now.
Well, and I should say that I'm an introvert too, and a pretty significant introvert. I see memes and things like that talking about introverts who have to go to work every day and pretend to be an extrovert, and I very much identify with that. And so perhaps I hope that those instances were as awkward as I feel like they were. Perhaps it's just the introverted side of me being too worried. But yeah, it's a struggle. But the other thing I always tell myself too is that growth comes in times of struggle, and by putting yourself out there and doing things that are uncomfortable. And I've certainly done lots and lots of uncomfortable things in my career as an attorney, and I'm sure that there are more ahead.
Yeah. And I do like that within the comp industry, we have the Women's Alliance, we have a lot of kids' chance organizations that you can go to and learn or meet people kind of on a smaller basis and then kind of branch out from there. But I do always see the young marketer, the young salesperson, and I'm like, oh, I'll just go introduce myself because they're probably dying right now and need like a friendly face. And so I'll encourage everyone, when you see those folks out there, especially if you're in a claims leadership position or you're an attorney or you're an adjuster and there's a little sales rep there, just go say hi to that person because they need friends.
I definitely remember like going to a conference and like people are talking in a circle and you're just like standing on the outside and you're like, I'd like to talk to somebody, but I don't know how to get into this conversation.
Yeah, and a good way too of building your network is like work the name tag desk, like volunteer yourself to be the name tag distributor or volunteer to be part of the event or help put the event on, because then you will meet the people who are chairing those events, but then you will meet people as they walk in and you're like, oh, I'm Andrea, and they're like, oh, here's your name tag. Nice to meet you. And then they have a friendlier face too. So that's a good way to get in there.
And I do think there's something to what Stephanie said of like putting yourself in that uncomfortable position is vulnerable, but like you don't win, you don't get anything if you don't do that. Like going to an event where you don't know anybody, like there's only upside, right? The worst thing that happens is you don't know any of these people and you don't meet anyone, you leave embarrassed, right? But no one knows because you don't know any of them.
Right.
But the upside is like you could meet 30 new people and start to build a really great network. So I think the more you put yourself out there, the more you take those chances and maybe embarrass yourself a little bit, like the more you do grow.
Yeah. It reminded me of something that I said yesterday too. It's why do we buy new clothes when we go on trips? Because those people have not seen our new clothes. But to your point, it doesn't matter. You don't know those people. They didn't know you were awkward. They didn't know you were uncomfortable. You just put yourself out there and then you went home.
Exactly. Exactly.
One topic I'd like to get into, because it's something that I also reflect upon a lot or have been asked about a lot recently, was confidence and imposter syndrome and things like that. And, Stephanie, I think it's interesting what you just said, that you got passed over the first time, but you kept at it. And, now you're really kind of learning that role. But did you ever feel like some sort, like, You've had a tremendous career, and you've been a friend of Amitros for a long time, and I see how you support your clients. But is there ever a moment where you're like, feel imposter syndrome at all?
Constantly, and it would be interesting to see statistics on it. I know most of the female attorneys that I interact with feel the same way. There isn't a single hearing or trial that I go to that I don't feel like I'm shaking in my boots and sounding like a ridiculous little girl. I'll then afterwards hear from my colleagues that I did a great job and I'll win the case and that kind of thing. But I think I deal with that almost constantly. And as we just talked about, the only way to fight it though is to just keep trying. When I suffer a defeat, when I didn't get the leadership role I wanted, when I lose on a case, I always think to myself that if I quit trying, there's somebody else behind me who's going to fill my shoes and take that position instead of me. It's, the world won't remember that Stephanie tried and didn't succeed, right? So you just have to keep putting yourself out there over and over and over again. And eventually it works.
Yeah, totally agree. Erin, what about in your career?
Well, in my career, I have found that being uncomfortable and working through that kind of gives me confidence. So I haven't actually felt imposter syndrome, but I've felt a little unsure of myself or a little green when it comes to either public speaking or leading a group or leading a training. And like you, Stephanie, said, all the while afterward to hear everyone say, you did a great job, or you had me from the beginning. It's like, I did? Wow, I really, struggled or struggled through that. Or I didn't think I would get there. But that feeling afterward is a confidence booster. And so taking each instance of that has helped build my confidence to where I almost no longer feel that way. Or if I do, I know I'll get through it, and kind of having the inner monologue like, yeah, this sucks now, but you're going to get through it on the other side, and let's hear what everyone has to say. So I think that's how I've gotten to where I'm at in my career, that I haven't really ever felt imposter syndrome, but being uneasy and unsure, definitely. I will even say I worked for the Department of Defense early in my career, and while I didn't feel imposter syndrome, going in as a civilian dressed in civilian clothes and most everyone else wearing an Army uniform, that, I stuck out like a sore thumb, and I definitely felt out of place, but not like I was trying to be someone I wasn't. They could read it all over me that I was a young civil intern. And that had some negative connotation to it, for sure.
Yeah. Melissa, I would like to hear from you, because you may be the youngest person on this pod right now.
Yep.
But you have had a great career. You've had a lot of promotions. You're running a really big team here at Amitros. But kind of how do you combat imposter syndrome or confidence, or, how's that in your life today?
Yes. And you're like, when do you feel it? Like right this second, being on this podcast. I think it's a constant thing. Like you have mentioned, oftentimes I am the youngest person in like a leadership meeting or, like on a board or something like that. And so that can be really intimidating to be like, do I actually know anything about what I'm talking about? But I think it's like a muscle, you like push through it and you're like, no, I know what I'm doing. Like I wouldn't have elevated to this position or be asked to do this if there wasn't some confidence in my skills or what I'm able to do. But I think it's a constant thing. It's like a little monster, like sitting on your shoulder, just like being a little jerk. That's how I view imposter syndrome. But you just, push past it and you say, I don't need to listen to that. But I really think everyone feels it. And I hosted a collaboration session with the Alliance and one of the ambassadors on imposter syndrome, and men feel imposter syndrome too, which is just not something I necessarily thought about. Like I think women experience it much more and it's much more talked about. But one of the takeaways was, men do experience it too. And so I find that comforting in some way. It's like, it's not just me, it's probably everybody feels it at some point.
Yeah. And I think advice I got once was that if you get promoted a lot or your career goes really fast, then like sometimes you catch up with like, oh, wait, am I supposed to be here? Was I really invited? Like it is like an inner monologue thing. But I do like, I think about this all the time. I think back about when I was at a previous job and I was one of the youngest leaders and senior leaders within the company, but I was, 31, 30-ish years old. And it never dawned on me that I shouldn't be in the room. But now in my 40s, I question it and I don't know why. And it's so weird to me that I even question it. And I was, asked to be on a panel recently and I'm like, why are they asking me? And then I was like, oh, I know why they're asking me. But it took me a minute. At first I was like, oh, shouldn't they ask, our CEO? And then it's like, no, they should ask me. I am in charge of our growth. So I should be on that panel. But it's like a muscle you have to just keep training that, you should be included, you should be involved, you should be invited, and then say yes and show up to that occasion and be excited to be there and show other folks that this was where too you could be in a couple years if you wanted to be.
Right. And I'm also go ahead, Stephanie.
Sorry. I was just going to say both your comments, Andrea and Melissa, you called imposter syndrome a little monster on your shoulder. This conversation makes me think that how important it is that we all help each other fight those little monsters, right? When somebody does a good job, when somebody's presenting well, we should, not be too shy to go tell them so, because I think that really goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where, Stephanie and I were at a meeting a couple months ago, and one of her colleagues kind of spoke over her, but realized he spoke over her, and he goes, I'll get in trouble for that later. And it just made me laugh, because when I think about meetings and things I go to, I'm usually one of very few women in the room. In that particular meeting, I feel like there was a lot of men-women representation, so that felt great. But I also felt very akin to Stephanie in that moment, because when you do get asked the question and a colleague or someone maybe talks over you or answers for you, or maybe you're not the default person to be asked the question, but you may be the subject matter expert on said question, you do need the people in the room to say, oh no, like Stephanie should be answering that, or Melissa should be answering that, or Erin should answer that, because they are the subject matter expert in that area. But your colleagues also need to help make space for you to recognize, and maybe you do need to, because Melissa and I have this conversation often, like, because I like to just jump in, and Melissa will be like, hey, like next time I want to answer that question, but we have the trust and the respect here to do that. But I think I would encourage everyone, if you're in group settings or you're with your own team and someone talks over you, or you want to have a voice, like say like, hey, I'd like to take that the next time this comes up, or, we're preparing for this presentation, I would like to lead such and such, because then people will see you as more of a front runner in that experience. But I do like that your colleague recognized that, and then was like, and then Stephanie, please finish.
Yes. He's heard me complain about that for many, many years now. So it's a work in progress. It's just, I think sometimes, men have a tendency to be louder and talk first, and, talk more emphatically. And so it's really easy, I think, as a minority or as a woman to not get the opportunity. I mean, I'm guessing some of you are aware of the same study. There are studies that have been done on Supreme Court justices, and minority justices and female justices are not allowed to talk, cut off midway through their statements far more than the white males. And so it's even at the highest levels of success, it's an issue that folks have to deal with.
Absolutely. But we're here to give you advice on don't do that to people. Allow the space for the other person to talk.
Create space. I know in the beginning of my career, I didn't talk a whole lot. I listened a lot. You've heard the old saying, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason, to listen more than you speak. And so whenever I did speak, it's almost like I commanded the room, because people wanted to hear what I had to say. Mm-hmm. And whenever I did speak, I spoke very assuredly. I was confident in what I had to say, and I was speaking for a reason, And so while people would say, you don't speak a whole lot, but when you do, we all listen, or when you do, we want to follow you. We want to hear what you have to say, because we know it's something worthwhile. So there's also that you have to be kind of cognizant of. Don't just speak all the time just because you can, or just because you think it might garner more respect or get people to listen more, but really thinking through what it is you have to say, when you should say it, and how, I think is important.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you.
I guess one question that I have for both of you is, we've talked a lot about this exodus of people, retiring in the industry, and another generation kind of coming up. What is your advice for that next generation? I'm sure we have folks listening who are of that generation, are relatively new in the industry. Like, what is your best advice for them? I'll start with Erin.
Oh man, starting with me. I guess my best advice is just don't be afraid to fail. Failure is part of the process, and it's okay to fail. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to mess up on projects, to make a mistake, but owning it and taking accountability for it, not only will you improve your own knowledge, will you learn from the situation, but you'll show others that you can be trusted, you can be relied upon, and that you'll do better in the future.
I love that. Stephanie?
I think my advice would be to remember how important community is and create community. One of the things that I see as the older generation is retiring, and as hard as it is for me to admit it, a younger generation seems to be coming in behind me, is that things have changed a little bit. Part of it may be COVID, but people don't pick up the phone as much as they used to. People don't come in person to events as much as they used to. When we host a continuing learning education event, most of the people are by video and have their videos off. And I see, even in the 13 years I've been practicing, I really am starting to see a shift in that time between the level of community that I used to feel and the level of community that I'm feeling now. And I think that that's really important. And so I would encourage all the young folks to go to the event in person, show up, speak, get to know everybody else, and form that community or network around them.
Andrea, what's your advice?
I think I recently said to this at our sales meeting, but I just think, again, it's pertinent for either new leaders or pertinent for people new in their career. But similar to what Erin was saying, like make mistakes, make failures, but also make decisions. Like the more time you spend kind of marinating on whether you should do this or that, it will fail you. It will fail the team around you because they don't think you can make a decision. So then you won't be trusted to make the next decision. So make a decision. And we're not doing, unlike Stephanie's child, career goals of brain surgery, we're not doing brain surgery here. So make a decision. And if it's the wrong decision, you'll learn from it, but you can also correct it. There's not anything that's going to be totally screwed up that you can't correct, right? So my advice is, especially to new leaders and young folks, just make a decision and be consistent, because I think that's a big thing. Like if you are always consistent in showing up to things, you will be given opportunities that others won't because they don't show up.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Yeah. And I was thinking, Stephanie, too, when you said about, the networking and coming to the events and things like that, I think that's so important for attorneys, because you have to get things done on your side. You have to have the other side know that you're a fair person, know that you want to get things done in the best interest of your client. They want to get things done in the best interest of their client. But if there's not familiarity and you've not seen that person before, that's a tough spot to be in, because you're kind of starting at ground zero. And then they're just looking at words and documents.
Yeah.
That's 100% true. And the longer I've been in my career, the more I phone in favors at times. Just a couple of weeks ago, I found a mistake that had been made on a case in our firm by an attorney who's not with us anymore. And I had to call up the other side, an adverse party, and I fell on my sword. I said, this was not negotiated correctly. I need you to help me look at the best interest of the injured worker. Let's see if we can fix this. And she did. And those kind of professional considerations go a long way. And so, as you're saying, Andrea, you have to have a connection, though, in order to call those favors in at times.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing is, we're kind of getting to the final moments of our podcast, too. I think we're all moms here. And I know that it's really hard to be a full-time working parent, to do volunteer work, to be part of organizations that help either your organization or your practice or what have you. It's also a way of giving back, but it's a time crunch, and you don't always show up as your best self, Stephanie, as you were saying, at all the things. But I think it's something that people do deal with, men and women, every day of, got to get the kids to school, got to get to work, got to get this project done, got to go do here, go there, go everywhere. But any advice, Erin, you might have for working parents?
Give yourself grace. I think that's my biggest advice. We can't be Superwoman or Superman all the time. Not every day is going to be our best day, but every day that we wake up and try and do our best is enough, right? That is enough. So we got to give ourselves grace and give others grace when they may not be on point, when they may not be showing up at 100%. And if we do that, if we recognize that we can't always be the best version of ourselves, but giving ourselves grace when we're not. I think that will create a more empathetic environment for everybody, and really a more understanding community, not only at work, but at home and in, our own respective communities. And that I think will go a long way in really just, we're all human, right? So it goes a long way in showing up and recognizing humanity and celebrating humanity.
Absolutely. Stephanie?
Well, first of all, Andrea, I'm mad at you because that made me tear up a little bit. I'm an emotional person anyway, and this has been something that's been on my mind a lot lately. I guess what I would say, and what my 6-year-old has taught me recently, is to trust in the kids too, trust in your family, that they pick up on a lot more than we think they pick up on. Yep. I sometimes think, especially with a little 6-year-old guy, that he's only perceiving and understanding what I want him to and what I'm trying to present to him, but he sees so much more. And I really, truly believe, based on some of the conversations I've had with him recently and some of the actions that I see him take, that he understands why mommy goes to work every day. And we talk about the fact that I'm helping people who need help. And I think he even knows that it's important for my, self-worth and value. And so just trust in the family and the kids too, to understand why you're spreading your time thin.
Yeah. I will say, and I'm glad you mentioned your little guy, my kids are so perceptive. It's insane to me, because I'll have an interaction with someone at a store or someone that maybe made me feel uncomfortable. And then we'll get in the car and go, you didn't like them. And it's like, well, it's not that I didn't like them. I didn't like the reaction we were having or the interaction that was happening, or maybe how that person showed up in front of my family if we were in like a social setting. And they're just so perceptive, because here I think I've got like the best poker face on. I'm being so kind and respectful to this person standing on the other side of the counter that is not taking the customer first. And then like the kids immediately know that I'm like not having it. But I really love that, Stephanie, too, because I travel a lot for work and my kids know that, but I feel like we have a routine down. On the weekends we're very organized and getting prepared for the next week. And it also, I think, helps them learn some responsibility. So like learning that, I will set all their clothes out for them for the week, their uniforms, but they have to, if there's changes to that, they're responsible for those changes. And, it'll teach them to be way more responsible, and they think in the future. That's what I keep telling myself.
I think it will. I liked what Stephanie said too. I mean, I feel like there's a role model aspect there. So my daughter is 1.5, and like I grew up with a working mom, right? Like she was a businesswoman. She was calling suppliers and like yelling at them over the phone. And I grew up with that influence. So like I knew I could be that, when I grew up, I knew I could do something like that. And that was never, a limitation. Like I thought a woman had to have a certain kind of job. And I think about that when I think about the role that I'm kind of playing, modeling for my daughter too, of like, how I show up in my career and how I prioritize that. And I also think that there's like a grounding or a prioritization of things too, where I'm like, in 30 years, am I going to remember this or care about it? And I think that really helps like bring it back down of like, if the answer is no, then I'm not going to worry about it right now. I think if it's something that's super critical, like I prioritize that. But if it's something that really isn't worth your time or effort right now, where your time and effort is so limited as a working mother, like just don't, it sometimes that's hard. I understand, but just put it to the side.
Yeah. I think it is hard to, because you probably feel like, oh, I'm letting that thing down or the person down, or someone will be let down if I don't immediately jump on that. But you make such a great point. Yeah, for sure.
We've been talking a lot. We're currently all reading the Let Them theory by Mel Robbins. So I think that let them.
Yeah, totally. And I got reminded that I am not on top of things like I wanted it, like I think I am, because I think that I'm totally on top of work and parenting. But we had over President's Day weekend on my calendar, kids were off Friday and kids were off Monday. But because we had a hurricane, or two really back-to-back hurricanes in October, we have a bunch of hurricane makeup days. And my kids actually had school on President's Day. And here I'm like on a Saturday night, like planning out what we're going to do on Monday. Like, let's go to the beach. Let's do this, that, the other thing. My husband goes, the kids have school on Monday. And I was like, no, they don't. And he was like, no, they absolutely do. It's a hurricane makeup day. And I was like, oh, really? And then my mom made a comment because my parents were there. And my dad was like, well, Chuck, that's my husband's name. He's the kind of the home parent. He would know better than she would. And I was like, that's right. But then we just had to shift our plans. Yeah. But I'm not up to speed on hurricane makeup days in Hillsborough County, Florida.
It's hard to keep track of it all. It really is. Like, I think the tools, like we have like a shared calendar now, like those things, like those types of things that you can implement to make your life easier, like take any route that you can. I know that's like a very privileged, kind of thing. If you have the access and the resources to make your life easier, like do it. That's something that I'm learning all the time.
Yeah, I got a pro tip this morning that before you leave the house, you can set everyone's Alexas to like do a timer thing, like put the dinner in this time, or like, hey, reminder, CJ, you got to make sure you have your gym uniform for tomorrow or something. Like use the Alexa. And I was like, oh, that's a pro tip. I'm going to institute that as soon as I get home.
That is nice.
Or get yourself a Chuck like you have that can remind you when it's a hurricane relief makeup day. Like that's amazing. But I think as family units, that just goes to show you picking up when someone else may not be able to equal that 50-50, like picking up so it's 70-30 or 60-40. I mean, that goes a long way. And being able to communicate that, like you said, you have a routine and all of that, but having him home and really being able to pick up the slack when he can, that goes a long way too. So that helps my mom guilt at times. Yeah. I have a Chuck, it's a Coleman, but he helps pick up the slack when I'm not all 100% there.
Love that.
Yeah, and I also think too, like, you said that your mom worked and that was a good model for you. My mom worked too, but my dad also did a ton. I also live next door to my grandmother who did so much, for all of us because she was retired and lived next door. Which was a great benefit to my parents, obviously, who both worked. But, in situations where, traditionally the dad is working more or is the breadwinner and the woman is not so much, she's picking up all the slack and picking up all of it. Like she knows the calendar. She knows what's going on. She knows where kids need to be. I still feel like I do a lot of the calendaring and I know where people are supposed to be. But at the same time, like, I'm not home probably 3 days a week. So Chuck is stepping in and stepping up and doing all those things where, his friends will say, oh, Andrea's not giving you permission to go golf or she's not giving you permission to do this, that, and other thing. I'm like, we don't have permission in our marriage. Like there's no permission thing. Like if he wanted to go golf and that was a priority for him, we would figure out a way for him to go do that. And now that our kids are much older, he could just go do that. But it's not I don't ever think of our marriage like that as like a permissions thing or like, someone has to, it's like check the calendar, right? Like, don't go away if there's, important things we have to do, but there's not that.
We've come a long way in those shifts though. 100%. From where we were like 1950s to now, that shift, it's huge. It's a huge leap.
Yeah. We can have loans. We can have credit cards.
We can drive cars.
That's so funny. Well, we are almost at time. So I always like to ask this question at the end, but Stephanie, is there anything that we didn't ask you today that you would like to leave us with? Any pearls of wisdom or final notes?
Oh boy, that's a lot of pressure. I don't know if I have any pearls of wisdom. Other than I think my takeaway at the end of this conversation is to allow myself to be imperfect and accept those imperfections and accept others as well.
Awesome. Erin, same question to you.
I would say in honor of Women's History Month that we should just be mindful that women came before us, women will come after us. Mm-hmm. We are making a big impact in the world and in this industry. And I am excited and happy to do it right alongside you guys. And thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the work that you do. And this has been wonderful.
Awesome. Melissa, anything?
I can't follow that. That was amazing. Both of those are amazing. Okay. I think it was just really illuminating that like all the threads in all of our stories are so similar. And I think that there is something like when we talk about community, there's something unifying about that, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not a unique to me problem. It is our society has so many pressures for women, and it's not unique to any of us. And I think that there's something comforting in that.
Awesome. Well, I do appreciate what both of you said, and Erin, bringing us back to Women's History Month and, why we're here today and why we did this podcast today. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Women's History Month and gets to learn something maybe they didn't know in the past, or maybe institutes a best practice or gets out there and builds their network. But really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to It's Settled, the Amitros podcast. For more information about Amitros, please visit our website at amitros.com. That's AMETROS.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear your feedback. Join us next time for more uplifting stories. Stay inspired and keep making a positive impact.